10 years on, how is it that we don't know where MH370 is?
Well, I think it's not from a lack of trying, or for resources, really. I think it's just because we really had such little evidence. What was left was some very vestigial satellite information. There's been a few things wash up on the east coast of Africa, but we've had very little to work on, and I think that's fundamentally what happened here. And if we think also that potentially this was some sort of deliberate act, then we can also assume, I think, to some extent that the mission of that deliberate act was to ensure the aircraft was never found. And in that case, it's been a great success and a great tragedy.
You've, in recent months, spoken of serious doubts about the search mission. Can you talk me through what those were?
Yeah, so I worked on the underwater part of the search for the first 12 months from September of 2014 to September of 2015. And, it was a very interesting activity to be part of. It was fascinating, really, to be perfectly honest, but it was also at times very difficult. And I felt that we had locked ourselves into one particular set of assumptions about where the aircraft was and about what was possible and what was not, particularly around what happened at the very end of the flight, and whether or not the perpetrator was still in control of the aircraft or whether the perpetrator was not. There was far more disagreement and far more uncertainty around that than I think the ATSB, that's the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, ever informed the public about. And I don't necessarily think that that was because they were acting in a deliberately in untransparent way. I think it was just because at the time it was very difficult to communicate that. But yeah, I think we locked ourselves into one approach to trying to find the aircraft, and when that approach failed, we had no backup plan and no ability to change course. And I think we probably knew that the aircraft wasn't in the search area that we were focusing on probably about a year, maybe 2 years after we started.
What do you think drove that assumption of where it would have been, and why was that so doggedly stuck to?
Well, I think actually it came from good practice. When you're looking for something in the ocean, you start with the last known position, and the last known position that we had for the aircraft was what's called the seventh arc, and that's the seventh of and the last of the satellite handshakes. So the communications between the aircraft and the satellite over the southern Indian Ocean. And so what you do in a search is that you start with the last known position and you work your way outward from there. But what we did, and certainly by the time I left the search in September of 2015, is that we'd actually searched enough of the seafloor to be able to rule out the assumption that the seventh arc was, as we knew at the time, what we thought at the time was a fuel exhaustion event. So we could probably confidently say at that point that the aircraft had continued to fly for some period of time, yet we weren't willing to let go. And I think there was probably a little bit of political pressure on the ATSB to keep going. They had made promises about completing a search box. And despite the fact that me and some of my colleagues felt that we were probably at that stage looking in the wrong place, it was very difficult. It was like think of it as a tanker, a big ship that had a course set, and trying to change that course was immensely difficult.
And you've also raised questions about why, in fact, it was the Australian Transport Safety Bureau that was leading this investigation. Who should have been doing it if not them? Would it have been better if it were the Navy, for example?
Well, I mean, perhaps I'm biased in that opinion. The ATSB is full of fantastic professionals. I really enjoyed working there. And my comments about whether they were the right agency to lead the search is nothing personal. Absolutely not. They're very good at investigating air crash investigations. That's what they do. And air and rail and all sorts of transportation incidents. They've got a fantastic record, but this is a completely different operation. This was an immensely complicated search. It's probably, I think, arguably the largest and most resource intense search in human history. And they had never conducted a search before, never conducted an operation that involved ships at sea and the possibility of recovering an aircraft from the ocean floor. So the notion that the ATSB were the appropriate authority to do this was itself, and it seemed at the time to be a bit fanciful, and I think that's still the case. Air France 447, which was the aircraft that disappeared in the Southern Atlantic, I think in around 2011. The French put a naval officer in charge of that search, and it was a multi-agency endeavor, a far more flexible one, a far more responsive one, and one that was ultimately successful. I think that would have been a far better model for the MH370 search than the one that we ended up with.
Do you think that we'll ever find the MH370, and do you think that those families of the 239 people will ever get that closure?
Well, I really hope so, and I can't imagine, it's the 10th anniversary, and watching some of that footage before was really arresting, and it must be incredibly difficult today for the families. And you think about everything that's happened in the world since March of 2014. We've had pandemics, we've had US elections, we've had all sorts of things occur, and yet their lives have in many ways stood still. There's been some other announcements this week about the potential recommencement of the search, which is fantastic news, and I'm hopeful that that's true. I think there's yet to be confirmation of that, but if it is true, that's great news. I think the technology has moved on a little bit. There's been also some reporting about Ocean Infinity having new technology that will enable them to find that they don't really have new technology, but they maybe have a greater capacity to send ships to the Southern Indian Ocean. So, yeah, I'm hopeful. I will never not be hopeful. The aircraft is somewhere. It will be found, I'm sure, at some point. There might be some technological breakthrough that will help with that, but for the time being, it looks likely that it will take some time yet. And I think that even if a new search were to get off the ground, that it wouldn't occur this year. It's more likely to wait until the southern summer, the next southern summer, which will be January 2025, I presume.
Peter Waring, thank you very much for your time this morning. We do appreciate it.
Thank you.